Lynette is a pretty good Anemo character who excels in off-field damage and crowd control. Her kit allows her to seamlessly integrate into a diverse array of team comps, making her an excellent alternative for existing Anemo support characters. In this video, we'll discuss everything you need to know about Lynette, including her active and passive talents, constellations, optimal builds, and role within a team comp. With that out of the way, let's start with her elemental skill. Lynette's elemental skill offers both a tap and hold option. Selecting the tap option triggers an Enigma thrust directed at her target, dealing a single instance of Anemo damage within a small AoE and generating 4 Anemo elemental particles. If you opt for the hold option, she enters a shadow state reminiscent of Yelan, increasing your mobility and giving you more precise targeting during combat. This state lasts for 2.5 seconds and can be ended prematurely by pressing the elemental skill button again. Upon release, Lynette teleports to the enemy marked with shadow sign and executes an Enigma thrust. The skill has a fixed 12-second cooldown unaffected by the tap or hold option. Notably, the cooldown begins only after the Enigma thrust is executed if you use the hold option. Additionally, Lynette will heal herself by 25% of her max HP once the thrust hits, but she also loses 6% of her current HP every second for 4 seconds right after, even if she's not active on the field. This effect is generally manageable, especially when effectively cycling through the cooldown to consistently replenish Lynette's HP. Furthermore, Lynette's elemental skill triggers a surging blade every 10 seconds. This blade deals with Aussia-aligned Anemo damage and introduces unique effects when facing certain monsters in Fontaine. Check out our Aussia and Numa guide to learn more about the arc system. It's worth highlighting that her elemental skill has a pretty high damage scaling, reaching 482.40% damage at talent level 10. Casting Lynette's elemental burst deals AoE Anemo damage and conjures a Bogglecat box. The Bogglecat box deals continuous Anemo damage to nearby enemies every 1 second within a pretty decent AoE. However, it operates at a standard ICD of 2.5 seconds, so not all damage triggers elemental reactions. While it may not pull in enemies like Venti's burst or Kazuha's elemental skill, it does taunt enemies within its AoE, enabling you to group monsters up. And unlike similar skills, like Ito's elemental skill, it doesn't inherit HP and just stays on the field until its duration ends. Additionally, it fires a vivid shot of a matching element it absorbed every 2.5 seconds and has a separate ICD from the continuous Anemo damage. Lynette's burst lasts for 12 seconds and has an 18-second cooldown. This is pretty good since you can theoretically cast her elemental burst every 6 seconds, provided you can get enough energy within that time frame. On that note, the skill comes with a relatively high energy cost of 70, emphasizing the need for a substantial ER to maintain reliable elemental burst uptime. Lastly, it's essential to note that snapshotting does not apply to her burst. Thus, when an attack buff expires, the skill's damage diminishes immediately. For the passive talents, Lynette's first Ascension passive increases the whole party's attack for 10 seconds after using her elemental burst. It gives an 8% to 20% attack boost depending on the number of elements present within the team. While this buff might not amplify your damage to the same extent as Kazuha, it could be a better option than Sucrose's buff for teams focused on freeze or mono elements. Given that elemental mastery doesn't extend freeze duration, and mono elemental teams don't rely on elemental reactions, the attack bonus from this buff can provide more advantages than Sucrose's EM bonuses. If you find this video helpful so far, please consider leaving a like to support the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Going back to the topic, her fourth Ascension passive increases the damage of her elemental burst by 15% after absorbing an element. Lastly, her utility passive is pretty helpful for underwater exploration, revealing recovery orbs in the minimap. Lynette's on-field contributions improve significantly with her constellations. Upon unlocking her first constellation, you gain a slight suction effect when using the hold option of her elemental skill. While the AoE and suction power may not match those of Kazuha or Sucrose's elemental skills, this added utility enhances Lynette's on-field effectiveness. Her C2 adds an additional vivid shot from her elemental burst, resulting in more damage and a chance to apply elements to more enemies with each activation. Through her C3 and C5 constellations, both her elemental skill and burst levels are raised by 3, increasing damage output. Constellation 4 introduces an extra charge to your elemental skill, giving you more energy regeneration and more chances to group up enemies when she is active on the field. At Constellation 6, she gains a Nemo infusion and a 20% Nemo damage boost for 6 seconds whenever her elemental skill lands. But this doesn't propel her into the ranks of super strong main DPS characters, mainly due to the relatively low scaling of her normal attacks. However, it would make her a more effective sub-DPS as it also increases the damage of her elemental skill and burst. This also makes her viable on taser teams so you can refresh the electro-charged reactions. When leveling her talents, I recommend prioritizing her elemental skill and burst abilities. If you intend to use her as a quick switch character or energy battery, you can keep her normal attack at level 1. If you have her at C6, it would make sense to level up her normal attack for some added Anemo applications on enemies. For support builds, you want to focus on getting enough energy recharge to cast your elemental burst consistently. You want to aim somewhere between 160 to 220% energy recharge, depending on your team comp and whether you unlocked her 4th constellation. If you plan to use her as an on-field DPS, just focus on increasing her attack, critical rate, and critical damage stat. With that setup, having one more Anemo character is recommended to serve as her battery. As a support, your optimal weapon choices for Lynette are the Sacrificial Sword or Favonius Sword. If you're using either of these weapons and have unlocked her 4th constellation, aim an ER value between 160 to 180%. This range should ensure consistent burst uptime, even if she's the sole Anemo character in your team. The Skyward Blade will also be a good weapon, giving Lynette greater damage than either of the prior weapons. However, you will also lose some good energy regeneration effects, such as the white orbs produced by the Favonius Sword or the skill reset provided by the Sacrificial Sword. So you will need higher ER stats, at least around 180% if she's the sole Anemo character in your team. Other notable alternatives include the Floof Sender Ferryman. At Refinement Level 5, it grants an additional 32% energy recharge on top of the 49.9% provided by the weapon's enhancement. Another option is the Festering Desire, which enhances the damage output and boosts the critical rate of her elemental skill. If you plan to use her as your main DPS, the Mist Splitter offers the highest damage potential. You can also use the Primordial Jade Cutter to pump more crit rate instead. Additional noteworthy 5-star choices include the Summit Shaper, Haran Geppaku Futsu, and Light of Foliar Incision. Among the 4-star swords, the top contender is the Wolf Fang Battle Pass weapon. However, the newly introduced craftable weapon, Finale of the Deep, is a close runner-up. The Black Sword and the Blackcliff Longsword are other solid alternatives to consider. Here's a quick comparison for all of these DPS weapon options. For the artifact sets, the Viridescent Venera set is typically the optimal choice for her supportive role. Alternatively, if you have another Anemo unit utilizing the Venera set, consider using the Noblesse Oblige set, which can amplify the attack of the entire party. You can also focus on her personal damage with sets like the 4-piece emblem of Severed Fate to increase her ER and elemental burst damage. Or use the Golden Troop set, focusing on her elemental skill damage. The 4-piece Marechaussee Hunter set is a viable option for enhancing normal and charged attack damage and increasing critical rate through the set's 4-piece effect. Statistically, it can potentially outscale other sets, particularly in terms of normal attack and elemental burst damage averages when accounting for the frequency of critical hits against enemies. However, it's not recommended to use this set unless you've unlocked her 6th constellation or you're using her as your main attacker. Moreover, the effects have a relatively short duration, leading to some inconsistency in maintaining the effect. When you aggregate the damages from her elemental skill, elemental burst and Nemo DOT damage, and normal attack average for each artifact set, the resulting chart will look something like this. This depiction solely reflects her personal damage in a setting where her skills can consistently connect with enemies. This analysis doesn't consider factors like elemental shred from the Veneer set, character skill rotations, the specific playstyle of your team composition, and the influence of elemental reactions. If you're using her as a support, you'll likely use her as a quick switch character, primarily utilizing her elemental skill and burst abilities. Therefore, you should focus on the chart's elemental skill and burst damage only. As previously mentioned, aiming for an energy recharge value between 160% and 200% is recommended. If you're utilizing an ER-focused weapon, consider selecting an attack sans, a Nemo damage goblet, and a critical rate or damage circlet for the primary stat. You can then fulfill the remaining ER needs through substats. However, if she serves as the lone Anemo character in your team and her fourth constellation remains locked, prioritizing an ER sans might be more beneficial. This approach helps prevent energy-related issues. A solid uptime for Lynette's elemental burst is still a little better than the damage scaling you'll get from attack sans. Alternatively, you can use elemental mastery for all your artifacts' main stats, focusing on swirl damage instead. However, it might be better to equip those for characters that can fully utilize the EM stats, like Kazuha and Sucrose. Optimally, you want to get as much critical rate and critical damage from the substats, but having attack percent or energy recharge substats can also be beneficial. EM is not optimal for substats unless you're pursuing an elemental mastery focus build for your artifacts' primary and substats. But of course, it's all luck when it comes to substats, so just go with the best available options until you get better ones. For her team comp, she will fit well with pretty much any team that works with Kazuha or Sucrose. You can run her as a F2P alternative option for team comps such as Vaporize, Melt, Freeze, Taser, Aggravate, Spread, or Mono-Element teams. And as mentioned earlier, she is a better choice than Sucrose for Freeze and Mono-Element teams because the attack buff impacts your DPS more than Elemental Mastery. Here are some examples of teams that work well with Lynette. Linny's Mono Pyro team, Shaw or Wanderer's Mono Anemo team, Huta's Vaporize team, Ayaka's Freeze team, Raiden's Taser team, Kuching or Sino's Aggravate team, the National team, and more. And that wraps up our complete guide for Lynette. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing to the channel so I can make more videos like this. And if you want to see more guides like this, check out these videos next.